What's happening, guys? It's the PicoDudes. And you know what we have today? We got a special treat. We have our very first in our interview series. And what that means is we actually got to go. Where'd we go, Jeremy?
We got to go to PicoBrew headquarters.
PicoBrew headquarters was so cool. It's like Disneyland with beer.
Disneyland.
It was better than Disneyland. It was fantastic. And we got to interview Mike Brennan. And you're going to hear all about that in just a few moments. We do ask you to give us a little leeway on the noise. We got to do the interview from the tasting room. One of the most awesome rooms I've ever been in. And this is the room that all the PicoBrew employees go into to try out new brews, to do comparisons, to do quality checks. It is right next to their main kitchen where they're brewing all their beers. So most of the noise isn't too bad, but you will hear a little bit going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were also some tastings going on. So we had our portable setup. First time we used it correctly.
Yes.
So anyways, we hope you enjoy it.
Hey, one more thing. We did get to see a pretty neat product while we were there.
PicoStill.
The PicoStill. And we saw them in boxes. We saw them ready to ship. We even snapped a picture for you. So check out our Facebook page and get a look, see if maybe your PicoStill's in the pile.
Oh, yeah. In the meantime, let's kick this episode off.
What's up, Broods and Broodettes? We are back for round 2 of the interview with Mike Brennan. Round 1, of course, we mentioned didn't go quite the way we planned. It was an awesome experience. We just didn't get a good recording of it.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through round 2. I'm Sam Rather. With me is Jeremy Hidalgo and our special guest today, Mike Brennan. Mike, cheers.
Sam, Jeremy, cheers.
So it is traditional on the podcast to drink while we're podcasting, so we're doing it right.
Excellent. I'm drinking a coffee porter, and since I'm a little short on glassware, I'm going to drink mine out of my coffee cup.
Can't think of a better way to do it.
And I'm drinking an IPA, and what did you say it was called?
I believe it's called Road to El Dorado. I'm not sure if that's an active partner or prototype, but it's obviously an El Dorado hop-forward beer.
And this has, of course, been all brewed in-house, right?
Absolutely.
With Pico
everything
brews.
here. Yeah. We don't really buy any beer here.
I love that. So, Mike, go ahead, if you would, please. Tell us a little bit about your background before coming to PicoBrew.
Sure. So I've been a home brewer for coming up on about 22 years now, off and on.
Wow.
Originally, before that, while I was in college, I was learning how to brew, and my background is cell molecular biology, minor in chemistry, and so I decided at some point in my life to use my powers of evil for good, and I thought I'd apply it to craft beer. So
Did you start in college?
I was brewing beer in college, yes.
Okay,
it's an extremely economical way, and it's a great way to stay very popular too with your peer group. Is when you're the guy with all the beer, with all the good beer. Fast forwarding to where this last few years, obviously working for PicoBrew for the last 3 years. I'm a BJCP trained, nationally ranked judge for beer judging.
That's the word we were looking for.
BJCP. We knew it was 4 letters.
Yeah,
There you go.
I came out away with like BGCP for some reason.
That's not us, yeah.
That's
What
not
does
it.
that stand for?
It's the Beer Judge Certification Program. So it is
Gotcha.
the formal beer, mead, and cider training process that's based here in the U.S., although it is worldwide. I can't recall the number of active judges. It's somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000, and there's about 877 of us right now that are national or master ranked. So here at PicoBrew, our master brewer, Andy Johnson, is also a BJCP national. Continue with me, I'm also there's another organization called the Master Brewers Association of the Americas. I'm the district Northern California membership coordinator for that group, and that's mainly professional brewers. It's all brewing education. So
Awesome. So how did you go 22 years of home brewing experience? How do you end up at PicoBrew? How are you so lucky?
Well, so a number of years ago, I started working with people in the homebrew world of a homebrew shop that's no longer in existence, helped him do some marketing, started giving some lectures on brewing informally and then more formally, continued with that as a lot of this new wave of brewers started opening up over this last 6 or 7 years. Many of them, probably 90%, are former home brewers. They don't have professional industry training nor a science background. And so I just kind of naturally fell into consulting for several of them to help them get their breweries off the ground, understand, the actual mechanics and physics of what's going on in a brewery at a large scale that we really don't do at the homebrew scale.
Right.
And then I met Annie, so our master brewer here at PicoBrew, who is the mind behind a lot of everything that happened with Zymatic for recipe development and oversees what goes on with all these Pico Pack changes. She and I were friends from the beer competition world. I'm one of the 12 national homebrew competition directors. There's 12 sites around the U.S. for that competition, which is the largest international homebrew competition in the world. Mm-hmm. So I run one of those sites. She won the 2013 competition, the brewer, so she was Brewer of the Year.
Yep.
And then sometime after that, I had her down at a brew shop to demo the new, at the time, Zymatic, and that floored me. It was the first time I had ever seen something in the homebrew world that was completely thought out from the ground up as a professional tool, and it wasn't weekend hodgepodge of garage guys building stuff. Right. And I was knocked out. And then Andy approached me a few months later and said, well, we're looking to kind of grow our staff. We need people who have technical expertise who can also get out and get in front of people. So wrote a couple marketing plans and went back and forth for a few months, and then ended up with an interview. And my first day of work was at the National Homebrew Conference in San Diego of June 2015. So we hit the floor running.
First day of work. What do you do on your first day of work then?
Fortunately, being at NHC, and I'm one of the NHC directors, so I already know the crowd. It's brewing, and I'd already played with the Zymatic a number of times, so just kind of get right out there and get people looking at automated brewing systems and our modernist take on how to brew.
Awesome.
So what did that lead to as a role for you then at Pico? What is your role here official, and what do you do? Sometimes those do and don't line up.
Well, I started here. Originally, I was slinging Zymatics. It was really working on our brewery program. That was a mixture of working with homebrew shops as well as breweries. We do bring, that was actually a big part of this org, is that we bring our brewing systems to breweries. So that Zymatic that some of your listeners may own, you have to remember that many breweries have Zymatics in-house. They use them for proofing ingredients, prototyping new recipe ideas. So it's that world of quality assurance, which is testing ingredients, quality control, making sure things are coming out right. We brought that to breweries. So that was my original role, that developed into brewery program management. And this last year, I've spent more of my time focused a little bit more on our retail side with our new Pico products, with the Pico Pro and then the Pico C that we're on now. And now currently we are into PicoStill, which is shipping now, and we're ramping that up. And so I've been working with that project for the last several months. And that's my primary focus when I'm not slinging Picos. So.
Awesome. Well, I know we're excited about the PicoStill. Is that something you want to tell us a little bit about?
This PicoStill is a blast. Kind of in a nutshell, it's a vacuum distillation system. What that means is that we're working to do, say, hop oil extractions, or using water, so we're using steam basically, or we can do that with botanicals, culinary items, or things in aromatherapy. Those can all be done by anybody because it's steam extraction. For licensed distillers or people who live in a region where distillation is legal, people can use it to obviously run as a very high precision, high efficiency prototyping still, actually doing alcohol distillations.
Right. Check your state and local laws before distilling any alcohol.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't want to get on the wrong side of the ATF. So, but because we're working under vacuum, we're using lower temperatures. So right now in your kitchen, you have to heat water up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius to get water to move into steam. With PicoStill, we're working at about 1/5 of the atmosphere's pressure, so that's allowing us to work at much lower temperatures. What's the benefit? One, it's just lower temperatures. You're not working with heated steam that can be dangerous. If you knock a tube off or something, you're not working with that boiling water. Number two, we're putting less energy into the system. So at full vacuum, the still basically is boiling water somewhere between 145 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Means less total energy goes in. We're not bashing up those really delicate flavor and aroma molecules that we're trying to get. So let's talk directly to your crowd. So people using a Pico. So you've got your Pico C or your Pico Pro, and you're brewing a really nice IPA. You could steam distill your hop oils from hop pellets and make a hop oil extract. You can add that to your beer the day that you normally dry hop, and instead of putting dry hops in there and soaking them for several days, you could add that extract, go ahead and carbonate up, and then serve, and you've got that big hop punch on top of your beer, but you did it in 2 hours on the still. You're not getting as much grassiness or those hay-like flavors that some hops can give you because we're not soaking it. You're not soaking that
So
plant
the actual
material.
plant, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or let's take the other way. You take some of that hop oil extract, you keep it in a dropper bottle for that day you go out with your friends and you're stuck somewhere where you're drinking, vapid mass market beer and it doesn't really, something light.
Something of the banquet persuasion.
Yeah, there you go.
I can't swallow this.
So you could give yourself a dropper load of that, put it in the beer, and bring all the, take like, a really pretty aromatic hop like Citra or Mosaic, and give yourself a little hop shot and keep that in your pocket. And so you can
And that really
it's like an
works.
emergency recovery thing for beer. So yeah. So
You need a first aid kit and your little thing of hop oils.
you're never without craft in your life at that point. So.
That's pretty awesome. So with that PicoStill then, you said a couple hours to produce that. How long does it take to produce a usable amount of hop oils? Or if you are able to, in your area with the licensing, distill spirits, like how long would it take to do 500 milliliters? Is there any understanding of what that time frame looks like?
Yeah, it's going to take, the PicoStill sits on top of one of our PicoC kegs, which it does ship with too. So that keg holds 5 liters. It's the same size as your batch that you brew on your Pico. So if you're steam extracting, it's going to take you, you can use a little less water. You can put 3 liters of water. It's going to take you 30 to 40 minutes to heat up to that steam temperature. And it's going to produce at about 100 milliliters an hour.
Okay.
And you usually want...
pretty good.
Yeah, and you usually just want about 100 to 200 milliliters because you've put only maybe, an ounce to an ounce and a half of hop material in the botanical glass, the borosilicate glass botanicals chamber. So that's about all you want because you want to keep it concentrated. And even under regular distillation, it moves at a pace of between 80 to 120 milliliters per hour. You can push it faster, but at the compromise of maybe the quality. So you want to take your time. Right now, it's not automated yet, but we are working on the algorithms that will ultimately, the goal is to get this to where it's going to actually be able to, using the temperature probes that are built into the still, tell us the parameters, what's going on, and it should be able to actually adjust temperature and pressure and be able to keep your distillation going in equilibrium.
Wow.
That's
awesome.
the goal.
It's
That's
amazing.
the goal.
So can you tell us a little bit more about maybe using it for essential oils? I was all excited when we left that, last Friday. I went home, I was telling my wife all about it. She's like, I don't understand. You can't eat essential oils. Well, I don't know. I think you can put them like in a bath.
Sure,
Or...
you could.
We have so many of them at our house.
Do you?
We need to get them talking. So
Well, if you think about this, you could do culinary botanicals. Try vanilla. Try cloves. Try something hard to do. Try doing rose water, or say, I remember I was watching a cooking show and there was a chef doing essence of violets for cake frostings and cupcakes and such. This is this high-end, ethereal, esoteric world of chefs. You can try the same thing. It'll take you a couple hours, pull some, essences of violet out and mix that in with your frosting, and there you're on Top Chef now. So I haven't tried it myself, but I have worked with some rose petals and such. And because we're using those lower temperatures, and lower pressures, we're able to extract things that, like, you wouldn't really be able to get a good rose water extract at regular atmospheric pressures because you just have to put too much energy in the system. You just blow those molecules up.
Sure.
So does this system, it requires the PicoBrew to run also? It doesn't just sit on top of the keg and be its own standalone system?
Correct. Yeah, it uses one of our Pico units, either the PicoC or the Pico Pro, because the still is actually heated by the water heating loop coming from your Pico.
That
so you're
makes
going to
sense.
set the temperature on your Pico. We actually have a function on the screen in your firmware that will circulate water down through a set of copper immersion coils that is in the base of that still. So that's what's being plunged down into whatever you've put into your Pico keg. And so we're going to control it with that. The still is going to, through Wi-Fi, it's going to feed temperature and pressure information back to your display screen on your Pico. So while you're running your Pico, you actually
wow.
all the data comes up on your screen.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's if you're a beer geek like I am, it's really good geeky stuff. So
is there a mad scientist here or two that hey thought up this idea? Because it seems like there was a lot of forethought in it, design of the Pico C and the Pico Pro, etc. But whose brainchild is this? Who would have thought of that?
Right? Yeah. PicoStill is actually a front for a whole bunch of mad scientists. Yes, that's actually the company is mad scientists. Jim Mitchell is our chief science officer here at PicoBrew. A lot of our equipment, Zymatic and such, were his hands-on in terms of the physics of how these systems work. Kind of his brainchild. Avi Geiger is our CTO who handles everything with engineering. He's a mechanical engineer, all under Bill Mitchell, Jim's brother, who's our CEO and former Microsoft executive, senior VP. So these guys all come from the land of thinking outside of the box and innovating. And that's exactly the culture here is about how do we innovate? How do we do it differently? And how do we do it either more efficiently or... Again, it still comes down to how do we make something that's accessible to anybody, but yet it's still producing the best possible quality product. Because that's what really Pico is about. The Pico C, the Pico Pro, the ability to cartridge brew, taking all of those variables. And as you guys know, you've brewed some beer now, and you've brewed a lot of beer. That brewing isn't as easy as going and getting some plastic buckets and doing the homebrew shop thing. Yeah, okay, you get something out of it.
Yeah.
But is it going to be really what you're targeting? You find out it takes a long time to get that good. And the grail of all beer making is make me the same recipe twice. That's the hardest thing you do because there's so many variables. And that was the mindset behind Bill and Jim back, it was 2009, 2010, when they went for that idea. Let's build a piece of equipment that way we can duplicate each other's recipes, because they used to trade their homebrew recipes back and forth, but their beers wouldn't come out the same. Because you have all the dynamics of your brewing system and everything else. So that was the whole reasoning behind the Zymatic originally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many variables, even just in controlling and maintaining temperature, at your house, and whether you're cooking on gas or electric or whatever. But
changes everything. You go to fermentation, and how hard is it to maintain a nice, steady state of temperature and pressure for yeast? And
very difficult.
If you want to change the flavor of your beer drastically, simply change the conditions that the exact same yeast live in. If we took one of your beers that you brewed and you've got like that little packet of SO4 yeast in there, try that yeast at 62 degrees, 66 degrees, and 72 degrees, and you're going to get 3 quite different beers just by varying the temperature. And that's just with one strain. Of course, we have literally hundreds of commercially available strains of yeast. It's part of the world that professional brewers have to adapt to, which is it's easy to go to the store or it's easy to go to the shelf and decide, what base malt, what color malts, what hops. And we already have a lot of choices. And then it's like, well, yeast can be up to 1/3 of a beer's flavor. What yeast do I use?
Sure.
Because do I want yeast-driven flavors in there? Do I want, like that Saison that you love? You need those nice, spicy, peppery phenolics. You need, some of those, soft citrusy or banana-like fruit esters, depending on the stuff. That's all yeast-driven.
So I know on the Pico brews, when I get my Pico pack, I get a yeast packet. But this is a yeast packet that's nearly the size of what I might add to a 5-gallon brew if I were home brewing. So I don't know, are those size specifically, or can you over yeast a beer? Would you recommend using that whole packet?
You can theoretically over-pitch yeast in a beer. It's harder to do than under-pitching.
Okay.
Under-pitching is more of the issue with beer because... as yeast farmers, because that's really what we all are. Humans, we can't make beer. We can make a really nice place for beer to live, or for yeast to live, and then in return they'll make us something lovely like ethanol and flavors and make us beer.
Symbiotic.
So it is a symbiotic relation, very much so. But when you pitch yeast, if you underpitch, you can stress them out because there's not enough. There's what's called osmotic pressure. It's the amount of pressure put on those cells by all that dissolved unfermented sugar, and that can stress them out. And when they stress, they cry, and they put out really bad things like bad esters and bad phenolics. And So the best thing you can do is obviously pitch correctly. So yeah, the pack that comes in your Pico pack, it's more yeast than you need. I believe our current literature says to put in 2 teaspoons. I'll tell people use half the pack. That's plenty of yeast.
Okay.
The reason why we have the dry yeast in the packs, even though there's liquid yeast out on the market, is that the dry yeast are just very stable. So they're already thermostable. Here's a little pro tip. When you get your Pico pack, open it up, take the hop cartridge out, stick it in your freezer, take the yeast packet out, stick it in your fridge, because those things will just last long.
If you're not going to brew it right away.
Yeah, it's just better. I mean, we don't necessarily
great tip.
have to recommend it. The hops are stabilized and they're gas flushed and such, but even at those conditions, temperature still causes something called alpha acid degradation. Sounds really like something out of a sci-fi movie.
That's my new movie coming out. In fact.
Exactly. Well, because it is.
Alpha acid degradation.
And it's a horror movie because it means that your beer is going to be less bitter. So
Yeah, it's harder to isomerize the alpha acid.
exactly. And so just, it's a pro tip. Up here at Seattle, it's pretty cold out. So, storing your garage, you're probably all right. But as it warms up, throw those in throw the hop pack in your freezer, because that's where you should be storing. That's where we all store our hops, is cold storage. So you can kind of slip that in there nicer. Yeast, those packets are quite stable. They have a very small loss per month on the shelf, but that loss goes down even farther when you put them into the fridge, not the freezer. Don't freeze them; you'll kill them. So.
No, we don't want to do that.
Don't want to do that. I do know when we talked last time, you had a fascinating analogy that stuck in my head, and we were talking about how long to ferment. And there's the yeast kind of go through their cycles of food at the table, if you will. You willing to share that analogy?
Sure.
I'll never forget it.
Yeah, we were talking about how yeast can produce off flavors. So there were things like when you have a beer, you might taste these things like artificial buttered popcorn flavor, or sometimes butterscotchy, or you'll get flavors of like cooked or canned corn, or the flavor of unripe green apples. So all of those are products of they're all fermentation issues that yeast put out. So like the first one I mentioned was diacetyl. All yeast make diacetyl, because what they do is, yeast are like I was saying, at least yeast are like little kids. They eat. If you just let them loose in the smorgasbord, they're gonna all run for the dessert. They're gonna eat the sugars, and they're gonna leave stuff around. So if we lock them all in and we don't give them any more food, at some point they're gonna have to start going back and eating things that are a little less interesting. So for yeast, they're gonna go and digest glucose and
The frosting first.
Exactly, they're gonna go for the easy sugars, but they're not gonna completely finish them out, and they're gonna just excrete them out of their cells, and that's those incomplete products are like, for example, diacetyl is a classic one. All yeast make it, and then what happens is their other energy sources are used up. They will go back and they will remetabolize that diacetyl, and they'll get more energy out of that molecule. So some yeast are better at others than cleaning up after themselves. Sadly, the yeasts that are the most flocculent, in other words, the ones that clump together and fall out of solution to leave you the clearest beers, the prettiest beers, tend to be the ones that are the poorest at cleaning up after themselves. So they tend to clump up pretty quickly when they're kind of coming out of active phase. They fall out and they sometimes leave that diacetyl behind. We can mitigate that with conditions. Lager yeast are notorious for it. So actually what we do, when we lager beers traditionally, we use cooler temperatures, below 50s up into the high 30s. That after the beer is completely done, we'll actually warm it back up into the 60s for 72 to 96 hours, and it's called a diacetyl rest. You rouse the yeast, they come back up, they'll pick up enough activity, just enough to go and clean up that diacetyl and then fall back out of solution. So DMS is that flavor of cooked corn or canned corn, and that's mainly a process that actually comes from the boiling of your wort, that unfermented part of the beer while you're making it. And it's coming from grains. There's one of the amino acids in there. It's called S-methylmethionine, that big, long, crazy sciencey name. That amino acid can degrade into DMS. And so that's why we want a nice, long, rolling boil if you're a home brewer. In our systems, it's why the system is open, and there's an open, continuous circulation, and you have that you have that open trap on there. You're allowing those vapors to escape, so that DMS, that flavor, does not build up. And then that last one I mentioned was acetaldehyde, the green apple, the uncut or artificial, or the unripe green apple. And that's another product of incomplete fermentation. So that's the kind of the last step that yeast can do one more thing to that molecule, get a little more energy out of it, and then that turns into ethanol, the booze alcohol. And so taking that back to kind of what Pico is all about, the reason that we came up with PicoFirm now, that's our current system to help you monitor your fermentation. We had Cake Smarts for the longest time, which is a great system, but it's just the build versus price point versus being able to sell it effectively. It's just the equation didn't come together really well. It was a great concept. Of course, we got a bunch of them out there and we still service them, but PicoFirm is kind of the new evolution of that. Yep. And that's all to help you as a brewer avoid those pitfalls of having beer that's less than perfect.
So now the PicoFirm uses two major measurements to understand where your beer is at in the fermentation, and that's temperature and pressure within the keg headspace. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, is that ambient temperature that it's measuring, or is it actually measuring the temperature of the air inside of your keg?
There's a little balloon on the adapter that fits on top of the C keg, and it's monitoring the temperature underneath there. So by extension, I mean, if you have your keg in a place in your house where the temperature is relatively stable, which is obviously very important to your beer, you want to be nice to your yeast. Don't put them through temperature fluctuations.
How many degrees would you say is stable in variation?
Any degrees.
In a perfect world, it would be exactly. We wouldn't move it at all. It's more about a slow change in temperature versus a fast change in temperature. Slow changes of a couple degrees a day, no big deal. But, if you live in an area where you have a large range of temperature changes, or, it's winter and you come home and you crank your heater on every day, try to put your kegs somewhere where the temperature's just not doing the roller coaster. Yeah. I've told homebrewers for years that my favorite thing to do is take a storage, like one of those polycarbonate storage totes, set your kegs in there and fill it with water up to the level of the beer. Don't drown the keg. And that way it acts as a big giant heat sink and just keeps the temperatures from floating up and down. So that's probably the easiest thing to do. Yeah, and it's cheap. And I'm all about, I have lots of homebrew gadgets. I have lots of things I've spent money on, but that's not a requirement. You already bought a good brewing system if you have one of ours. So it's right. Let's just help you maintain your temperatures better. So.
Yeah, because essentially there's major things that contribute to how your beer turns out overall. One of them is controlling all the elements of your recipe and your boil times and everything, which is what the Pico does, so that your wort comes out.
Thank you, Pico.
Yeah, so that your wort comes out dialed in. Second thing is the fermentation, which is figuring out where exactly those temperatures and those flavors that you get from the yeast are going to come out, which is all part of the fun.
Time, temperature,
yep. And then are there any others? I think you mentioned water.
I think that's the last big one, right?
Is that
Well, we're actually sitting in our part of our lab at PicoBrew. This is actually I'm in here a few times a week. This is our sensory room. So we do. There's myself, Annie, of course, the two of us that are BJCP. We have another person here, Lindsay, who's on Annie's team, who's a Cicerone, and another group. We come in here and we taste a lot of these beer samples. So the board behind me has a short list of some of the variables that we're currently observing. So you guys are looking behind me. How many we have on this board right now?
Oh, man.
Probably 30 variables that we are exploring, and this is just the current ones that are on the board. We do a tremendous amount of laboratory R&D here. Yes. Jack Phillips, our head brewer, who actually is in charge of the day-to-day operations of working and adapting all those PBN partner recipes to Pico packs, works with the lab team, and this is what they do. It's not just, can we just adapt the beer? It's also, well, what happens when we press variables different directions, and how do we turn that into a better experience for Pico owners?
Sure.
So, and this is a process that has been ongoing here for years and will continue on for years. We're constantly looking at what goes on in the brewing world. There's the other side of the room, there's a spectrophotometer, there's my microscope actually that they're borrowing. So we're always looking at variables.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's many of them. So more than you want to do at home.
So before we let you go, because we could talk to you all day, I'm curious. You get to taste so many of the beers that come out of the PicoBrews. Do you have any favorites that you're like, hey, if I only get one or two to brew for the next year, this is what I'm probably falling back to?
That's a tough one because
so many children, you love them all equally.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like all politically neutral by saying, but truly, once they've reached Pico Pack, we've gone through the beers. They're all, excellent beers, and they match a brewer. Because of personal style interests and such, I kind of have these two extremes. I love Czech Pilsners and those lighter German and Czech style Pilsners, and I love big, huge, evil, thick, motor oily stouts and porters and such. So one of our first Pico Pack partners, or one of our earliest that got popular, was Tallgrass Brewing Company. They're in Manhattan, Kansas. We have their Buffalo Sweat, their stout, and I love that beer. That's wonderful. We're doing one of the coffee porters right now, which is a great beer. But those are kind of...
Jeremy drank all his.
I drank it.
Oh, there we go.
It was so good.
Locally, of course, we have Lucky Envelope. We do his lager, and that's another one of those just beers. I just love that beer. So those are my two extremes, and probably two of my favorite beers in our line.
Yeah, I think I rated is it pronounced Helles or Hells?
It's a Helles, yeah.
Helles, okay. So I rated that one 5 stars on my my brew house, and I thought that was a great beer.
Yep.
Yeah, they're fun beers, and I think that's as a worldwide beer explorer, as a beer judge, we have to know so many different styles of beer. I mean, there's right now we categorize beers into 34-ish major categories, each with multiple subcategories in there. So it's a lot of beers to know, and having a Pico unit and having the access to, what do we have right now? I think the last time I looked at the board, we have 217 or 218 PB and partner breweries, and of those we have well over 100 of those recipes, probably 125 or more on Brew Marketplace that you can buy now. This is your ability to travel the world by the pint. And you get to experience these. We have partners in Belgium, we have partners in Germany, we have, I think, we have 4 in Berlin alone. And so you get to try those beers, and it's like being able to go around and get those beers, because you can't get those beers here. Yes, you can buy a European beer. No, it's not going to be fresh. And we know that beer freshness is the key to what we love about great beer. It's why do you go to the brewery? Why do you go to a tap room? Why do people do beer vacations and travel to Germany, and they want to go to Cologne to go taste the Kolsch? They want to go to those places because it's where the beer's fresh and the beer's been made correctly. This gives you that opportunity to do it in your house. So
you heard it here first, folks. PicoBrew's your ticket around the world with beer.
Absolutely.
And I can't talk because the porter is so good.
Yes. So
I'm so glad.
Reminder that PicoStill, awesome machine. We got to try some of the hop oils, and it was mind-blowing, and now I can't wait to get one and put it to work. You can get still in on the early pre-orders here. These are starting to ship to Kickstarters today.
Well, they've been shipping. We had a little delay with a part that we were waiting for from a manufacturer, but we're ramped back up. So that price on the internet actually starts to change very quickly. I don't know the date, but right now I think it's still $249.
Yep, it's $100 off.
Yeah, and that'll go to $349 as soon as we kind of officially make that move, and then so that goes to the $349. And yeah, as long as you have a Pico Pro or a Pico C to run it, then you're in business, and you're able to have a lot of fun with it.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate your time so much, and
thanks for doing this twice.
For sure, gentlemen. It's good times.
We'll make sure not to lose this one, just to have an excuse to come back a third time. Appreciate it. That's Mike Brennan with PicoBrew, and PicoDudes are out.
Cheers.
Cheers.
You've reached the end of another episode of the PicoDudes podcast. Connect with us at PicoDudes.com, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And if you enjoyed our show, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, but mostly iTunes. Also, if you want a code that will help give you some discounts off of the PicoBrew equipment, Z150D equals $150 off of the Z series. Pro 125D gives you $125 off of the Pico Pro, and C75D gets you $75 off of your purchase of a Pico C. We hope you enjoy listening. Look forward to hearing from you. PicoDudes out.